administration under the rule before us today focuses key resources on this technology, part of which is developed right in my own district in New York's southern tier. We cannot delay this any longer, and we cannot effectively secure our nation and to deter our adversaries, including China, without ridding our nation's military of the radical left Green New Deal agenda that they seem to embed in our defense policy moving forward. This policy of battery-powered vehicles harnessed by resources sourced from a supply chain dependent on communist China leaves our nation less secure and more vulnerable than ever before. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle point to the Biden administration's transition to electric non-combat vehicles in our armed forces as a win for the environment. But I ask them, is it really a win for the environment if we source these critical minerals from strip mines in the Congo and transport them across the globe to be refined in countries that ignore many of the environmental regulations that we take for granted here in the United States? Are we really protecting the environment when we foist inefficient, unreliable vehicles on our nation's military while China and India build hundreds of new coal power plants every single year? My colleagues on the other side of the aisle, they know the answer, but they'd rather push their false fairy tale narrative that these policies are going to reduce global emissions to score political points. They want to ignore the dangerous situations that these policies ultimately put our military service members in. We need common sense policies that focus on merit, lethality, and readiness to shape our military in the coming years, not the woke dreams of a radical left that would prefer a country to not have a military at all. We certainly know that they don't believe that we should have a border, and as the policies of the Biden administration have so thoroughly illustrated to the American people. I urge my colleagues to support the rule before us today and help pass another bold and focused and crucial NDAA that will support our service members and ensure that the U.S. military remains the strongest fighting force on the face of the earth. And with that, Madam Speaker, I yield back.
Madam Speaker, I reserve.
The gentleman reserves. Gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Goldman.
The gentleman from New York is now recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the distinguished gentlelady from Pennsylvania for yielding the time. I rise today with a warning for my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. You are setting a very dangerous precedent by trying to hold an Attorney General who has provided all of the substance requested in a subpoena in contempt. And let's be very clear. This precedent that you are setting is one that your own former president and cabinet secretaries repeatedly violated in the last administration. In 2019, the former president famously said that he would defy all congressional subpoenas. And then he did just that during the impeachment inquiry. The State Department refused to turn over a single document. Under your precedent here, with Attorney General Merrick Garland, who has provided everything that you have asked for, except for the audio recording of an interview with President Biden and the special counsel, you are moving into dangerous territory. There is no legitimate legislative purpose to require the Attorney General of the Department of Justice to turn over the audio recording of an interview of which they have already turned over the transcript. Now, I hear my colleagues on the other side of the aisle use explanations such as demeanor evidence and character evidence. That's all well and good if you were considering whether or not to prosecute President Biden, but that's not the job of Congress. There's no legitimate legislative purpose in figuring out, quote, demeanor evidence as to whether or not President Biden, how he sounded when you have the information. And it is particularly galling that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are going to try to hold the Attorney General in contempt for this narrow issue when he has substantially complied with the subpoena, when 5 of my Republican colleagues completely defied lawful congressional subpoenas last time, including the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. You are setting a dangerous precedent, and you, my friends on the other side of the aisle, ought to think twice, because what goes around comes around. And I yield back.
Again, members are reminded to address their remarks to the chair. The gentlelady reserves. Gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The following things are true. The subpoenas were legally authorized. The subpoenas were not complied with. And I would remind you, Madam Speaker, that the words "except for" are even being used by my Democratic colleagues on the other side of the aisle. People don't have the option to comply partially with a subpoena. Nobody in this country does. With that, I yield 3 minutes to my friend from Wisconsin, Mr. Van Orden.
Gentleman from Wisconsin is now recognized.
I thank the gentleman from Georgia. Madam Chair, I rise today in support of H.R. 8070, the Service Member Quality of Life Improvement and National Defense Authorization Act of 2025. As the longest serving enlisted member of the military in the history of Congress, I bring a very unique perspective to this problem set. And I get the chance here to stand and speak about the differences that we may share when it comes to sending billions of dollars to other countries for them to fight their wars. And we can have that discussion, and I respect both sides of that argument. But nobody in this body can reasonably argue that any member of the United States military should be living below the poverty line as they defend our freedom and the very House that we stand in today debating this bill. To frame the problem that our service members face, a civilian can apply for an entry-level position job at a convenience store in my district and receive higher compensation than if they were to join the United States military. As I was serving as an active duty Navy SEAL being shot at in combat, my wife was standing in line to buy food products using WIC coupons, and I simply view this as unacceptable. In addition to my experience as a service member, I serve on the Agriculture Committee, and as we were debating the Farm Bill, we were talking about additional SNAP benefits for members of the military. And that's just the symptom. The root cause is that the DoD brass and previous Congresses have been relying on welfare to subsidize American service members' salary so that they could expend these monies on different parts of the defense industry. This has caused the enlisted pay gap to become a chasm and is the antithesis of military leadership. Our junior enlisted have been taken for granted for too long, and it's only exacerbated by Bidenomics, which is creating an inflationary environment that is crushing the entire nation. The first truth of the Special Operations Forces is that humans are more important than hardware. And this bill embodies this truth by including a historic 19.5% pay raise for junior enlisted, marking the most significant raise in history. Now, unfortunately, President Biden has not included this pay raise in his budget. And I find it wholly contemptible that someone, the president specifically, who has managed to become a multimillionaire on a public servant's salary, would snatch the food out of our junior enlisted mouths as they stand in the breach protecting his very life.
Gentleman's time has
I ask
expired.
strong support.
An additional minute to my colleague from Wisconsin.
Gentleman is recognized for an additional minute.
I am proud to have many of my provisions included in this NDAA that will ease the service members' transition from active duty to becoming a veteran, and I thank Chairman Rogers for his work and support on this. I will continue to champion these initiatives and will continue to fight to support our service members. And with that, I yield back.
Please, members are reminded to refrain from engaging in personalities toward the president.
Madam Speaker, I reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I do agree with some of the gentleman's comments about the need to increase pay and benefits for our junior service members and service families, but I have to strongly disagree with his attempts to turn this into an attack on the president. We've seen multiple reports from experts talking about the challenges that our service members face, and the challenges we see to recruitment are because our economy is so strong that people have other better paid and better resourced opportunities under the current economy than they have for years, and that has been suppressing recruitment and retention. So I think his economic analysis is a little off. I did think when he was getting up here, he might be here to speak about some of his amendments that were not being made in order. Last night, the majority of the Rules Committee, the Republican majority, voted unanimously to disallow amendments that would protect our federal firefighters from cancer-causing PFAS chemicals. These were bipartisan amendments, and the gentleman from Wisconsin was a co-sponsor of them. So I assumed that when he was here today, he was here to speak against the rule, and I think perhaps that's the best choice until we have a more bipartisan approach to the amendments that should be made in order. Madam Speaker, at this point, I would yield 5 minutes to the gentlewoman from New Mexico, a distinguished member of the Rules Committee, Ms. Ledger-Fernandez.
The gentlewoman from New Mexico is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, yesterday in Rules, we had a rare but wonderful moment of bipartisanship as we considered the NDAA. Republican Chair Rogers and Democratic Ranking Member Smith spoke in harmonious unison about the benefits of the bill, which increases pay for junior enlisted members of our armed services by 19.5%. It invests in childcare, healthcare, and job opportunities for their spouses, which are especially important for rural bases like the Cannon Air Force Base, which is in my district. But remember, these bases are often in rural districts because cows don't complain when those planes make a lot of noise flying overhead. And these benefits are essential as we battle low recruitment levels. We must treat our service members with the same dignity and respect that they offer our country and our flag. Last year, however, I might remind us that we had a similar bipartisan bill come to Rules, which was then weighed down by poison pills added as amendments on the House floor. These amendments had to be taken out in the Senate. This year, we once again see many proposed amendments adopted in this rule, which are seen as poison pills by so many. These amendments would block service women's access to reproductive health care and abortion. As the climate faces more extreme storms, one of the amendments would prevent our military from combating the climate crisis and building resilience for our bases as sea levels rise. But, Madam Speaker, I want to speak to an amendment that was left out of the rule. Our Republican colleagues blocked a vote on the bipartisan amendment to extend and expand the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, an amendment offered by Republicans Representatives Moreland, Wagner, myself, and many others. For 30 years, the United States has provided a one-time payment to some of the Americans who were exposed to radiation from the U.S. government's nuclear testing program, and these people developed cancers or other diseases. For reasons no one can explain, WRECS left out many communities who were downwind from these nuclear explosions, like New Mexico, where the first atomic bomb was exploded, or the communities where the nuclear waste from the Manhattan Project leaked into the water and soil in Missouri, Tennessee, Kentucky, Ohio. It left out the workers who cleaned up the radioactive sites from this nuclear testing program, which was essential for our defense. Uranium miners, including those who worked after 1971 in Texas, Wyoming, and North Dakota, were left out. Republicans and Democrats represent these communities who share a common bond of grief and illness. Our WRECS amendment would provide justice to these communities and make sure they're eligible. It would also extend the program for 5 years since it is now expired. Some will say we can't do this because of the cost, But the cost has already been paid in cancer diagnosis, medical bills, and death. The government assumed this cost when it started our nuclear testing program, when it first poisoned those unwilling Americans. The government recognized it should pay this cost when it first passed WRECS. Our ask is simple today. Please let every person harmed by this national defense program receive the same compensation. Blocking a vote on our bipartisan WRECS amendment is walking away from the opportunity to do right by these communities whom we have hurt. WRECS expired on Monday. Every moment that Congress fails to act is a moment when another downwinder or miner might get a cancer diagnosis, a moment where a son or daughter may start to plan a loved one's funeral. We cannot wait to do what's right any longer. While the moment to vote on an amendment to this NDAA may have temporarily passed in the House, Speaker Johnson, we're asking you to let the House vote on the Radiation Exposure Compensation Reauthorization Act that the Senate already passed by a 2-to-1 vote. I urge a no vote on the rule, and I yield back.
The gentlelady from New Mexico reserves. From Pennsylvania. The gentlewoman from is recognized. Oh, reserves. Okay. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I reserve and would ask the gentlelady from Pennsylvania how many additional speakers she may anticipate.
We're ready to close.
I reserve. Yes, ma'am.
The gentlewoman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As you may have guessed, I strongly oppose this rule. The rule likely guarantees that there will not be bipartisan support for the NDAA, and like last year, this means that the House will get steamrolled by the Senate. And as we've discussed this morning, the 2 contempt resolutions included in this rule are not a serious legislative effort, but a manufactured dispute between House Republicans and the Attorney General, which threatens to undermine rather than promote the rule of law. We'd be a lot better off with a clean rule for the NDAA, stripped of all the partisan nonsense, so we can focus on our core constitutional duty to provide for the common defense. Conducting oversight over our armed forces and funding our national security are 2 of Congress's most important responsibilities. But the kind of politicization we see from the House Republicans is disrespectful to the American people. It's unbecoming to this chamber and signals to our service members that we don't have their backs when they may need it the most. As the NDAA goes to the floor this week, I call on my colleagues to reject the poison pill amendments which have been presented and maintain the bill's bipartisan support. Madam Speaker, I urge my colleagues to oppose the previous question and the rule, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady from Pennsylvania yields back. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I'm prepared to close. Yield myself the balance of my time. Madam Speaker, this week we have the ability to advance significant legislation in the House of Representatives. The Fiscal Year 25 National Defense Authorization Act fully authorizes our national defense and improves efficiency while eliminating wasteful spending and harmful programs. It strengthens our military and makes important steps to address the security threats America faces from our adversaries, including China, Iran, and foreign terrorist organizations. It improves our military readiness, provides robust support to our ally Israel, and supports law enforcement operations at our southern border. And critically, Madam Speaker, it focuses on improving the quality of life of our service members and their families who sacrifice so much to defend us. Madam Speaker, it provides a 19.5% pay raise for our junior enlisted service members and a 4.5% pay raise for all other service members. Additionally, Madam Speaker, the House has the responsibility to protect its Article I authority to conduct oversight and investigations. This week, Attorney General Garland has a choice: either comply with the lawfully issued subpoenas completely and turn over the tapes, or be held in contempt. I ask my colleagues to join me in voting yes on the previous question and yes on the rule. Madam Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time and move the previous question on the resolution.
The gentleman from Georgia yields. The question is on ordering the previous question on the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
I would request the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question are postponed. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the chair declares the House in recess subject to the call of the chair.